Welcome to the Think Small podcast, hypergrowth for small businesses. So, what's slowing you down?
Well, hello again, everybody. This is Rob Godlewski with the Think Small podcast. And today our guest is Dr. Orit Hickman with the Pain Science Physical Therapy based in Seattle, Washington. Dr. Hickman, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Rob. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be a great conversation. So, Dr. Hickman, you have a very unique approach to what I would say is a traditional physical therapy office, and you have taken a different kind of slant on it. So, tell us about the business and how you got started and how you came to found Pain Science Physical Therapy.
Sure. So I've been a practitioner for 26 years. So I graduated back in 2000 from physical therapy school. And our approach to treatment was very focused on looking at structure and function and movement, and everything that we did in the clinical setting was very much around biomechanics and anatomy. And when I started doing clinical practice, at about 9 years into clinical practice, I opened my own private practice because I wanted to do one-on-one care with patients. And at that time, as I started spending more and more time with patients, I started to figure out that kind of the traditional approach of looking at movement and assessing movement as the primary focus for treatment wasn't really getting it done for the population of patients that I was working with, that were really just the average people walking in the door. But there was a subset of patients that were coming in that had symptoms for a much longer period of time. So really persistent pain symptoms. And it was occurring to me at that time that the approach that I had really wasn't getting it done with those patients. I was kind of struggling. These patients would often have flare-ups. They would come to me describing symptoms that would change when the weather changed, when their stress levels changed, if they had recently been sick, or they would have something happen just, sort of innocuous. They would do a movement that maybe they had done, multiple times over and it didn't cause a problem, and all of a sudden they would have pain. And we really weren't equipped to treat the patients that were having these complaints who didn't even really understand why it is that was happening. So it's a very similar approach to treating patients with acute injuries as with chronic conditions. And so right about that time, as I was starting to scratch my head with patients, I went and sat in on a first pain science course. And it was a course that was a 2-day course that was given here in Washington State. And it was kind of like my mind was blown for the first time. At that point, I'd been practicing for 11 years. So for the first time in 11 years, I was like, wow, this is completely different. It was a different approach to treating patients. And I actually came back on Monday and completely stopped touching patients for a period of time and just did a lot of education with those patients. And some subset of the population actually did better with me just educating them on the neuroscience of pain. Some subset of those patients said this isn't physical therapy, and so they didn't come back. And then some of them.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah. So this isn't what I'm used to, so I'm not coming back for this. And then some of those patients left, but then came back later. And as a pendulum often swings one direction or another, going from being a very hands-on, exercise-based clinician to just doing what we now call psychologically informed physical therapy, it was a pretty big swing at that time. And I did that for a while until I sort of figured out, well, I still needed to help people move better. Patients still needed to be able to get to a place where they could address fear with movement. And so I think the pendulum's now sort of in the center where the combination of education and understanding why it is that pain exists, when it's now also attached with let's address fear with movement, let's address protection programming that patients have put in place, and let's go through kind of a more comprehensive approach to taking people back into movement. That seems to be it sort of seems to have come full circle, and it feels like, okay, that's what needs to happen now with patients.
It's really interesting. So let me get my timeline straight. So you founded the business actually in what year?
So I founded the practice in 2009. And at that time,
Okay.
the only reason I opened was because I just wanted to do one-on-one care with patients. I was
Right,
kind of
right.
right. I was kind of done with I didn't have had a clinician mindset. I wasn't an owner, right? So the
Okay.
mindset was I want to be a clinician and I want to treat in a very specific way. And so that was my whole focus with opening my practice. But with that 2-year timeline of spending all that time one-on-one with patients, I was starting to figure out that the approach that I had had for so long really wasn't doing so well with a lot of the patients who had persistent symptoms.
Right. So, and then you transitioned the model of your business after this mind-blowing I guess course you went to.
Yeah,
What year was that?
that was in 2011.
Oh, okay. Okay, just a couple years then.
Yeah.
So running this as the business that stands today for 15, 16 years, uh, I can imagine when you first transitioned this business to more of, as it says on your website, a biopsychosocial model of care. And you did kind of address it. Some of your customers kind of revolted
Yeah.
and decided not to continue services through you. At what point did it become that okay, this isn't going to implode my business. This is actually worthwhile, and I'm doing the right thing. When did that kind of kick in?
Um, I don't know that it ever I think that when I went through that 2-day course, I knew at the end of that course that the model of the way that physical therapy was being practiced up until that point needed
Hmm.
to change
Hmm.
going forward. So I had just full-blown conviction that that was what needed to happen. I will be honest, I wasn't willing to put the money where my mouth was until 2021 when we rebranded the company. So up until that point, I was doing this work, but the other clinicians that were working for me, they would use that, and they would use this they would take this biopsychosocial approach, but they weren't fully embracing it. So there was a buffer. So if somebody didn't want to see
Sure.
me, I could see
Okay.
somebody else. So it didn't fully impact us financially until 2021 when I said, okay, now we need to shift this completely. And we're doing it again now in 2026 too, because we're changing again. But I would say that at around that time was when it was like, oh, now we need to actually embrace this. And we need to actually say, I had been practicing at that point enough, and I was having patients returning to me who had had no success elsewhere. I was having providers start to shift and go, okay, I see. Like those same providers who in the beginning, when I first started this work, were like, no, no, Orit, they have real stuff going on with them. They have things. We see these things on their images. They have real things happening. This is not psychological. And so those same providers were now starting to shift, going, can you tell me more about the approach that you're taking? Because
Interesting.
they were seeing and experiencing the struggle in their own practice with being successful using a very biomedical approach to treating their patient population. So they were experiencing it on a greater level and saying, okay, we're not actually as successful as we think we are. They were just a little behind the curve.
So you allowed your employees, your teammates, a 10-year window to kind of get on board or not. And when you finally made the decision to, like in your words, rebrand the business and focus exclusively or company wide on this new methodology for treating patients, what kind of fallout did you have from your employees? Or did you give them so much runway that they all said, you know what, Orit, we're in?
I had learned a long time ago that when you make a big change, some people are not going to stick around.
It's very true.
And so we did have, I think in the beginning, people hung on, but eventually they self-selected out. And so providers specifically hung on for a little while. And then
Hmm.
those that didn't feel like this really spoke to them and they didn't want to use this approach or approach the treatment of patient care within the biopsychosocial framework, they self-selected out and moved on to other, and I mentored them out too, right? Guided them out of the company. But on the flip side, the providers that are joining the company fully now understand who we are, what we do, and are already seeking us out because they're saying, okay, I'm exposed to this approach. I've been exposed to this a little bit in PT school, or I know somebody who has, experienced chronic pain, or I myself have experienced chronic pain, and I now see that this is where I want to work. And so it's attracting the right people into the company by
Of
being more
course, of course.
focused. Yeah.
But by giving them, that long of a runway, you really accomplished your long-term goal of driving the whole business to focus on this effort from a whole business standpoint. But at the end of the day, right? This is a business. You need to drive revenues and keep your people employed and hopefully drive a profit for you, the ownership group. How did that journey, so 10, 12, 15 years, how did revenues scale up or contract or plateau through that period?
You know, um, so physical therapy, and we're not unusual in the medical field, although we do have some significant challenges. Physical therapy has had a long history of seeing declining reimbursement. And so when in an insurance-based model, which is what I started at, and which I am, as we kind of spoke about, I think originally, we are now starting to transition away from. With the insurance based model, I came from the East Coast originally, and on the East Coast, reimbursement rates for physical therapy were quite low. And
Hmm.
so the only way that you could really survive as a PT clinic was by high volumes of patients. And it was not what I was taught in school. So it was it was a big struggle for me from the beginning, and is a big reason why I ended up owning my own private practice was that I didn't like that model. I got into physical therapy to be able to provide high quality care. And there was never a thought in my brain that I was going to do that by seeing 4 patients an hour, which is sometimes what I was seeing on the East Coast. So when I moved out here, to the West Coast in 2007, reimbursement rates were significantly higher. So I was able to get away with opening a practice and seeing patients one on one for an hour, and for us to be relatively profitable early on.
Hmm.
And the struggle that all PT business owners who go into private practice, or many of them go through, is that we are clinicians first and foremost. So it is not trained, we are not taught in school how to be business owners. So it
Right.
took a while for me to get a business owner mentality. So right around 2021, when we rebranded the company, we had been seeing declining reimbursements steadily since I opened, but I was not something that I was tracking close enough. And leading up to the rebranding in 2021, we shifted the model and we went from 1 hour one-on-one per PT to patient, and shifted to 45 minutes of patient care. And that immediately improved our reimbursement rates because we could see more patients.
Sure.
And so revenue was driven up by the fact that we could produce more, right? It's the
Hmm.
widget model, right?
Absolutely.
You can only get so much pay per how many widgets you produce. The challenge, of course, has been that the squeeze has continued, and we saw a pretty significant thing occur kind of around 2020 and COVID, which is that the number of PTs in the workforce has dramatically dropped as well. So we have declining reimbursements combined with a declining workforce, which is, we're not unusual in that, right? I mean, find me a business that isn't struggling to find good people. And that's the business that I think I need to go into because this is, right? Physical therapy, we've been seeing this for a long time. So it was a pretty significant shift in 2020. And so in 2021, we rebranded and we dropped the amount of time we spent per patient so that we could see more patients and maximize revenue. And for a little while, we were profitable again. We're like, okay, this is great. But that decline has continued and it is pushed forward by the Medicare process. So Medicare kind of sets the standard, and then insurance companies pay us some percentage of the Medicare fee schedule. So Medicare says this is how much we're going to pay for physical therapy, and an insurance company might pay 110, 115, up to 145% of what that Medicare fee schedule looks like. So as the Medicare reimbursement continues to decline, then the insurance reimbursement, of course, also can decline.
Sure. But on top of that, you mentioned that you're also seeing a fewer physical therapists out there, probably because of the declining insurance reimbursement models.
Yep.
Are you finding that because of your change in focus to this more biopsychosocial approach to care, that you're seeing a similar decline in applicants or available resources, or are you able to essentially pick off the cream from the top?
It's a great question. So it's something that we are definitely, I am seeing, a smaller pool because I have become very specialized. And so we've started to discuss and have started to look at hiring clinicians across state lines. So saying, because the work that we do can be provided via telemedicine. So now it's like, okay, let's start to think about, can I hire somebody in another state who can treat patients in that state so that it still drives revenue into the company, but it also then we start to actually be able to treat more of these patients because that's the other piece, right? There's not a lot of providers doing this work. So we need to sort of find them, bring them under the umbrella and say, okay, how do we then get the word out there so that more patients have access?
So that's the other pivot you kind of realized you were able to make, in that, I mean, this is almost an Uber moment for you, Orit, in that you've now created a business model where you don't have to physically have hands on a patient in a physical therapy appointment. That's mind blowing, and I think that's a tremendous opportunity for you and the business to approach growth that way. When did you realize that, hey, if I don't have to put hands on a patient in the Seattle, Washington area, or within 60 minutes of my physical office, I can go out to and spread a wider geographic net. When did that realization come to you, and what have you done about it?
So the telemedicine piece hit me before COVID.
Okay.
Because we were starting to have patients that were living far distances, even in Washington State, that were traveling to come see us. So I was already noodling on that, but insurance wasn't on board. So one of the silver linings of COVID was that the pandemic did bring about the ability for PTs to provide telemedicine, and it continued, and it still continues. I believe the Medicare rule is still allowing it, I think, through the end of this year, maybe even until 2027, that PTs can provide telemedicine for appropriate patients. And there are many states where PTs can provide telemedicine now. So I was already noodling on that early on, but leading up to probably most of last year and the year before, I had been thinking about, for the last 2 years, I'd been thinking about, it's been really a struggle to find the right people to employ to do this work. This is not in everyone's, wheelhouse. It's not what everybody wants to be able to do. It is very cognitively challenging. It requires a heavy lift from a mental health standpoint for the provider to do this work. And I remember my husband worked for the government for about 7 years when we were based on the East Coast. And I remember him saying at that time, back in 2000 to 2007, that, he has colleagues who live all over the place who would be absolutely wonderful people to work for his department. And at the time, the government was like, we don't hire people to work remotely. They need to come into the office here in downtown DC. And he was like, it's such a shame, right? And so it's something that's always kind of been in the back of my head. And when I
Hmm.
started really struggling to find the right people, and also this access piece was in the back of my brain too, which is that there are providers, we exist, but they're not easily found to be able to match the provider to the patient and say, hey, this is the work that you're going to benefit from. So I was already starting to think about how do I get a list or group of providers together to be able to connect them with patients so that patients can do this work with them. Um,
Hmm.
and so these things were sort of playing in my head for a couple of years leading up to this year, where I've actually started the process of reaching out. And I think I have about between 2 and 4 providers right now in different states that are interested in doing this work and having extra training, having extra access to other providers that are struggling with the same things.
Very interesting. So the telemedicine piece, operationally speaking, is very new.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the transition to changing your brand, changing your messaging, and focusing exclusively on biopsychosocial care. As from a business perspective, how did that affect revenues?
It didn't actually,
Hmm.
surprisingly. Like, I don't think it certainly didn't make revenue decline. So in the world of PT, the way that we have to code when we see a patient, an insurance company didn't look at it as anything different. Our documentation, if you did a deep dive into our documentation, you would see we did, X, Y, and Z in terms of patient education, but we could
Sure,
just
sure.
bill it under sort of the usual PT codes that we
Okay.
use to do brain retraining. And so it wasn't like there was a significant shift in terms of it wasn't a decline, and it was certainly not an increase in revenue. But
Okay. But
yeah,
not
so
necessarily a decrease either.
no, no. What I think it started to do is it started to clarify for certain patients that maybe this wouldn't be the right fit for them, and we would have to sort of, navigate and send them to a different type of environment. But I would say that is actually happening much more significantly now with us leaving insurance. So we're actually
Mm,
doing that transition where we've said, because of declining reimbursements and increasing, rising costs, we have to say we can't continue to do that. It's a poor business model and is not one that is sustainable. And so
hmm.
the decision was made to start the process of leaving insurance. And we started that at the beginning of March. And as a result, we did see an immediate decline in the number of patients
I'm
willing to
sure you
come
did.
see us.
Yeah. But have you done any financial modeling or forecasting to
Yeah.
maybe try to see, okay, when does this tipping point, cross over for the good? I
Yeah.
can imagine by not billing insurance and being now you're completely discretionary care, if you will.
Yeah.
When does that really change the profitability for you?
So for full transparency, we were not profitable at all last year. I think we had a 2% profit compared to 12% the year before.
Okay.
And we actually had increased revenue last year, but with the rising cost of expenses, the amount of net profit
Yeah.
dramatically declined.
Let that be a lesson for everybody in this audience. When your revenues are growing and your profit is contracting, it's time to look at a new business model. And I say
Exactly.
that with a smile on my face, but in all seriousness, you have to do that. And you did.
Yep. It was, I saw the writing on the wall. It was such a
Yeah.
dramatic shift. And I said, this is not, it's not sustainable. So when I did my modeling, the assumption was that we would stay, so we were seeing about 1% cash pay or direct pay patients January and February. It's already gone up to 13%. So
Hmm.
our blended rate has gone up about $30 a visit just with the shift from, being fully in insurance to transitioning out. And our model for the next 3 months it was to be at about 90% insurance, 10% cash. So we still have enough insurance that it was going to take up about 90%, but we're running more closer to 85-15. So that
Okay.
was because we just didn't know, right? I modeled it as 90-10 for 3 months and then said we would continue to push 70-30, 50-50, and then flip the other direction. From a profitability standpoint, we already should be profitable this month for the first time in a long time if all the numbers work out and all the patients, because we went into the month as a surprise. We would typically see between 600 to 650 visits, and we're still on track to see about 550 visits. And
Hmm.
so with the payer mix being much more um, uh, beneficial to us in terms of like seeing that we've dropped all of our lowest payers, then we might actually be profitable this month. If not, we will be within the next.
Well, I got to tell you, Dr. Hickman, having a major pivot in business model and being able to turn the profitability corner in a matter of months and not years is a tremendous feat. So well done. Congratulations on that effort. Um, I, I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on the next 3 to 5 years, of this business. Not only do you want to continue to expand the less physical touch, more biopsychosocial aspect of the services you provide and the care you provide, but I'm really intrigued by this expanding the telemedicine offering.
Me too. I
So
won't
what does that
lie.
next three? Yeah, what does that next 3 to 5 years look like?
You know, uh, to just kind of give a quick background, when I first started doing this work, I really did feel like an oddity, like I was a silo, even within my own clinic. And so, the as I mentioned, the work of working with patients with complex and persistent pain it's a very heavy cognitive load on a physical therapist. And
Mm,
so I really foresee and want to see providers in every one of the 50 states where we have all of these different providers who are, across the country able to provide this care. At least one in every state, if not two or three, and that we're all under the pain science umbrella. So all the providers can, have a network of other providers to reach out to ask questions. We do a lot of, internal education, and it's great to be able to be, in another type of setting, you would have providers that the breadth of what they're covering, it can be very, very different from where your interests are. In this case, all of the providers are having similar interests. We all have some level of complexity in the patients that we're treating. So what I foresee is that there are all of these providers and they're all connected through the pain science company and being able to do the work that they want to do on their own terms. Another piece, and you mentioned earlier about, some of the challenges with hiring is also associated with declining reimbursement. Physical therapists are amongst the most resilient, creative providers I have ever met. There's a reason why I wanted to do this work. And so I have a firm belief. It's always funny because patients will be like, "Don't you guys make six figures?" And talking to a provider of like 15 years who's like not even close, and it's like, okay, let's revamp this, right? These
Yeah,
providers deserve to be paid well. They deserve to not have to have, secondary and tertiary jobs and roles to be able to, they should be able to do the work they want to do, make a great wage, be able to buy a house if they want to buy a house, have, families and travel. And
of
um,
course.
so to me, that's the other part of it, is that I want the providers that work for me to be able to actually feel that they can do the work that they were meant to do, that they went to school for, without feeling like they need to leave because they're not getting paid enough and they have to go someplace where they have to see high volumes of patients to
Right.
be able to.
Right. So if the goal is a minimum of one in every state, one care provider in every state, as a frame of reference, how many people do you have in your employ now providing this care?
So right now there are 6 of us in this clinic.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's a big growth goal. That's what I
Yeah.
call a BHAG, a beer,
Yep.
big, hairy,
Very
audacious.
audacious goal. Yep.
That's right. So can I ask you, Ori, what would be holding you back from achieving that goal of one care provider in every state?
Um, I think it's just systems, right? It's putting
Hmm,
in place the systems that need to be in place to ensure that we can, and we've started that process, partnering with a marketing company. So we have to be able to market for the patients so they know we're there. Connect with the providers in that state who are looking for us and the work that we do. Of course, connecting with the providers in each of the state who are the PTs who want to do this work. So bring them under this umbrella.
right.
I've had to start to do a deep dive into payment structure. So trying to figure out, is this a situation where these providers are part-time and or full-time employees versus a 1099 employee? And probably the likelihood is that they will be part-time to full-time employees. They'll be W-2 employees versus
Hmm.
1099 employees, just because of the challenges with state and federal laws.
Of
So
course.
there's sort of all of these pieces. And I don't know what I don't know. So there's like a lot of like trying to figure it out as we go along. Like we've got 2 specific providers that I'm working with right now, and we're starting the process, asking all the questions, trying to figure out, all the logistics, getting them onboarded. And so yeah, it's a lot of systems, and and marketing more than anything.
Amen to that. As as a chief marketing officer for clients in my day job, I fully support that. Uh, uh, Dr. Hickman, this has been a amazing conversation, and your business model has and congratulations, you've kind of thrown off my regular line of questioning in this podcast because your business is so unique and you're pivoting in two very specific ways that is going to challenge your growth and your goals. But I applaud you loudly for this. I'm excited to learn about different businesses that really disrupt the status quo. And I think you're it. And I would never think of saying that about a physical therapy business but kudos to you for taking on this
Thank you.
challenge of not only redefining what physical therapy can be, but taking it a completely different way, geographically speaking. So I wish you all the best. Dr. Orit Hickman, are there any final thoughts you can offer our podcast audience relative to establishing a growth engine for a small business?
I think my only final thoughts would be to, be passionate and stick with your passion, but also know that you may know a very little piece of what is sort of the greater knowledge that needs to be attained to really help make your business successful. And I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the coaches that I have worked with. And they have been, and I'm there, and they continue to be foremost, the most important people for me to lean on, because I got into this as a clinician, right? I just got
Sure.
into this as somebody who just wanted to provide care in a very specific way, and have learned to become a business owner and continue to learn to become a business owner and evolve that identity over time. And so, leaning on others and getting perspective and guidance from coaches been a huge deal for
Orit, that's great advice, and one I actually hear a lot from our podcast guests. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. Again, this has been a terrific conversation. Dr. Orit Hickman with Pain Science Physical Therapy. We wish you all the best in your
you.
future growth, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much, Rob. This has been great. I appreciate it.
Welcome to the Think Small podcast, hypergrowth for small businesses. So, what's slowing you down?